Renaissance Art Gallery by Chris Elias, Jack Morley, Jake Williams, and Jordan Young.
Throughout the Renaissance, artists and their work would show the principles of humanism and secularism. Humanism and secularism shaped the artwork of that time. How humanism and secularism are shown through artwork. Humanism. If an artist showed learning, religion, or men making their own decisions in their artwork, it would show humanism. The Renaissance was seen as time of revival and interest of classical learning of Greece and Rome. Writers looked back to ancient Greece and Rome and sought to revive the languages, values, and architecture and intellectual traditions of those cultures which artists later showed in their pieces. All of those are examples of humanism. Petrarch and Giovanni Boccaccio did this. Artists showed people preparing for their afterlife through art. This can help show humanism because in secular art, they do not focus on the afterlife. Classical values were also incorporated into artists' work, which is humanism. Classical architecture was included in paintings that demonstrate humanism. These architectural features included domes, arches, and columns. Greek and Roman mythology was another focus in humanistic paintings. Greek and Roman mythology was an example of humanistic art because it was educational and they were looking back into the past to learn about what they believed occurred during that time. Artists could show humanism if the piece explored the psychological state of those depicted. Some artists had a different view on things which they would incorporate into their artworks, showing thought and other views on things. This could lead to learning.
How humanism and secularism are shown through artwork. Secularism. Artists showed secularism through many ways. One way artists incorporated secularism is by painting people doing everyday ordinary things. This could be farming, fighting, praying, etc. Artists also often included common topics to show common life, which would lead to secularism. Common feelings or topics included love, happiness, anger, and more. Common occurrences like famine and war also represented secularism. Because they were more frequent subjects, another way artists revealed secularism in their art was through portraits. Portraits were the most common way artists showed secularism because they were casual and showed no principles of humanism or religion. The meaning of secular is of this world, which shows how artists would also show how people focusing on their life at the moment. In humanism, artists showed people focusing on their afterlife rather than their actual life. Another sign of secularism would be less religious paintings. During the Renaissance, people started to transition from focusing on religious values and ideas to just doing everyday normal things. The society became more secular, which means less religious. Lastly, nature and human anatomy in painting developed the theme of secularism.
Development of the Renaissance. How it began. Renaissance is the French word for rebirth, and it began in Italy. Art and education was focused on. One factor to its development was that empires grew and different cultures were introduced to others and combined. Literature spread, classical texts were brought back, and many ideas were popping up or being reconsidered. Expert Robert Wilde explains that the courts and monasteries of Europe had long been repositories of manuscripts and texts, but a change in how scholars viewed them sparked a massive reappraisal of classical works in the Renaissance. Humanism was a major contributor to the start of the Renaissance. Some people began to view the world and their life differently because of humanism. Expert Robert Wilde says, Renaissance humanism was a new manner of thinking and approaching the world. It had been called the earliest expression of Renaissance and is described as both the product and cause of the movement.
Development of the Renaissance. How Renaissance art changed from the Middle Ages. Art in the Renaissance was focused on humanism and secularism, which focused on classical architecture. Art in the Middle Ages was focused on religion. Middle Age art had many different styles, including Byzantine art, Romanesque art, and Gothic art. Middle Age art showed no depth and the colors were not as bright. Renaissance art, on the other hand, was more vibrant and more in-depth. Renaissance art also had Roman and Greek mythology. Renaissance architecture began to look more classical. Renaissance art also focused on the human body and was more realistic.
In the painting Banquet Scene by Dirk Holtz, humanism is being represented. In this painting, there is classical architecture that is being shown through the domes and columns shown in the background. This revival of interest in usage in classical Greek and Roman architecture also shows learning, which is what humanism was mostly shown through. Thomas More, a writer who had a large influence wrote in one of his most famous writings, Utopia, most people know nothing about learning. Many despise it. Dummies reject as too hard whatever is not dumb. In this quote, Thomas More is highlighting the importance of education. Artists later used his ideas and incorporated learning into their work as well.
In the painting, The Fall of the Rebel Angels by Pieter Bruegel, it clearly shows humanism in two ways. Expert Tom Lubach says, this picture shows battle of good and evil. Even before the fall of man, when the most powerful angel, Lucifer, turns upon the divine authority,
Following this, he is chased from heaven by Archangel Michael upon God's order, bringing about the fall of the other rebel angels. This quote reveals the use of Greek and Roman mythological creatures. This picture is roughly divided up into two halves. Heaven takes up the top half of the picture, while hell takes up the bottom half of the picture. It also focuses on the afterlife of the mythological characters. This gives a better idea on how there were so many different ways artists could incorporate humanism into their work. This picture also includes sea creatures, butterflies, poultry, armored knights, tentacles, tails, eggs, and fruit, which symbolize the beauty of nature.
In the artwork, the Parnassus by Raphael shows humanism because of the use of ancient Greek characters. Located in the center of the painting lies Apollo, one of the several Greek gods and goddesses in this work. Lying to the left side of Apollo is Calliope, another Greek goddess within the painting. According to Hesiod, she is the noblest of all these muses. According to ancient Greek mythology, Calliope was an handle of music and poetry, which are forms of education. This is crucial information to support how this painting shows humanism, because as we previously mentioned, interests of Greek and Roman mythology, as well as education and learning, portray humanism. In a painting of the Sermon of St. Stephen by Vittore Carpaccio, it is concluded that it portrays humanism because of classical architecture located in the background of the painting. According to the novel Venetian Narrative Painting in the Age of Carpaccio by Patricia Fortini Brown of the Yale University Press, Carpaccio is well known for this style of artwork, more specifically his use of classical architecture and cultural ideas. Carpaccio's use of classical architecture shows humanism in his work because it shows how he is reviving something from earlier times. In this case, he is reviving arches, domes, and columns.
The portrait of a young woman by Sandro Botticelli represents secularism as is focused on the right then and there. In this portrait, Sandro Botticelli is trying to capture the image and looks of a young woman named Samota Vespucci. It is popular opinion by many historians that Botticelli was in love with this woman from Florence, Italy, because of his almost obsession with her painting her. Now, this is a secular since this portrait captures a part of Botticelli's personal life in the moment rather than a focus on his afterlife or any religious ideas and beliefs. Love was occurring in the common life of Sandro Botticelli, which is also a very secular idea. The painting, A Goldsmith in His Shop by Petrus Christus, is an example of secularism in a few ways. One would be through the simplicity of the painting that is making it ordinary and secular. This painting is also showing still life. In this painting, it is clear to identify that a man in a shop doing his work. This shows simplicity as well. Marianne W. Ainsworth from the Department of European Paintings, an experienced writer, wrote, "We are repeatedly struck by details of astonishing and microscopic verisimilitude of landscapes, still lifes, portraits, and genre elements that convey the experience of everyday life." Ainsworth was referring to the ideas that Renaissance artists included in their artwork. Portraits, still life, everyday genre elements, and landscapes are all signs of secularism. This quote shows how artists included secularism through an ordinary picture like he to the one right.
The painting of Jupiter and Io by Antonio Allegri de Correggio shows humanism through the use of ancient Greek and Roman mythical figures. The two ancient mythical figures used by the artist are the god of the sky as well as thunder, being Jupiter, and Io, who is known for being a lover of the Greek god Zeus. The common use of these ancient mythical characters shows humanism because of Correggio's attempt in reviving or recovering a part of earlier times. For what he is trying to recover is this painting is the ancient mythical characters, which is prime humanism.
The portrait of Baldassare Castiglione by Raphael represents secularism because there's no Greek or Roman mythology included. It is just a simple portrait showing everyday life. This painting is a beacon in the Renaissance art era as it inspired artists and scholars to go back to roots of the classical Greek and Roman societies as a means of influencing a new culture. A new idea of humanism became prevalent, and this gave rise to a more secular society. This caused a shift away from the traditional society in which the church was dominant. The following pieces in this art exhibit display contrasting ideas from this period in art history. On the one hand, there are Christian devotional images, and on the other hand, there are more simple paintings of secular figures. This quote tells how artists could use the society around them to represent secularism in their art. It also shows how simple paintings were known as secular. In the painting, St. Michael by Raphael, it demonstrates secularism as it shows St. Michael overcoming the rebel angels and slaying a dragon. St. Michael is a spiritual warrior in the battle of good versus evil. He is considered a champion of justice, a healer of the sick, and the guardian of the church. In art, St. Michael is depicted with a sword, a banner, or scales, and is often shown vanquishing Satan in the form of a dragon. St. Michael is the protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. All these concepts are examples of secularism, as it is portraying good defeating evil.
The two characters we can identify are Venus on the right and Cupid on the left. Venus is the goddess of love and Cupid is the god of love. This painting is based off a story that is told in the poem Cupid Stealing Honey by Theocritus. In fact, in the top left section of this painting, we can see a section of Theocritus' poem. Secularism is shown in how Cupid and Venus are tied in with love because they are the god and goddess of love. According to Louis Gauvier, this painting is showing an example of a common human feeling through both anger and love. Anger is shown through Cupid's discontent with being stung by bees, and love is being shown through the god and goddesses. Thanks for your time.